welcome to the panel. This is on the Single National Curriculum, the Progress Report. In this particular panel, we'll be discussing to what extent the SNC has brought about equity and created inclusion for children in Pakistan, whether private schools are being held to a higher standard in implementation, and what difficulties government schools or maybe madrassas are facing. Very quickly, our panelists today are Chaudhry Faisal Mushtaq. He's the founder and chairman of the Roots Millennium Education. He's recognized as one of the 500 most influential Muslims of the world for 3 consecutive years, from 2014 to 16, from the Islamic Strategic Studies Center in Jordan. He's a leading national academician, education reformer, and social entrepreneur. Dr. Mariam Chughtai is a founding associate dean and assistant professor of the LUMS School of Education. She's also the director of Pakistan programs for the Harvard Middle South Asia Institute. Dr. Chughtai has a doctorate in education from Harvard, and she's also leading on the single national curriculum in Pakistan. Professor Panjwani, he leads the Aga Khan University's Institute of Educational Development as dean. He's been an academician for over 27 years, and he's returned to Pakistan from the UK, where he was the founding director of the Center for Research and Evaluation in Muslim Education at UCL, and previously was at the AKU ISMC. His passion lies in improving the quality of education in developing countries. Arshad Saeed Hussain is the managing director of Oxford University Press since 2018. He's previously worked with leading multinational companies and is the former managing director of Abbott Laboratories and Syngenta. He's an alumnus of Etchison, as well as the London School of Economics. So with that, we'll start the session. I hope I can still be heard clearly. Okay, so Dr. Mariam is saying yes. We've just had the first quarter of the academic year already underway. The implementation of the single national curriculum has seen some concerns on multiple fronts. The objective of the SNC was to end education apartheid by providing uniformity in curriculum for private and public institutions. But different books, course materials, and NOCs for supplementary reading materials are a hurdle to this process. And some of the context of the textbooks that have come to light are raising concerns. So we'll speak to the panel and we'll just ask about this. So since this is a continuation of our previous session, in the previous session, we've had 3 members who are still here today. You all highlighted concerns back then. You highlighted opportunities and reasons for optimism. So I'm going to open it up with a question is, what's the progress report? I mean, it's in implementation from August, it's November now. If I could start with you, Dr. Faisal Mushtaq.
The problem at large in the beginning was the ideological problem, whether we wanted uniformity or we wanted a pluralism in our teaching and learning standards. When the PTI government became in power, they had 4 promises. One was, the first promise of the current government was out of school children, and the second promise was to deal with the education apartheid. And the third one was the quality of teaching and learning. And the fourth was to invest in vocational and skills education. So, the most easier one was to put together a single national curriculum. Over there was, we really wanted to see a framework. We wanted to see minimum standards. We wanted to see best practices. We wanted to see capacity building. We wanted to see teacher training. So, in absence of building capacity of the whole educational ecosystem, I see that there has been an enforcement of the single national curriculum in the context of textbooks and syllabus. So the curriculum and the syllabus document and the textbooks, that is where I personally and professionally I see that things have been imposed. There's the same effort. No one is against the national curriculum. It should have been a standard national curriculum, or it could have been, what do you call it, a minimum standards or a national education framework. But the way it has been imposed in the context of publications, in the context of textbooks, and in the context of uniformity in both teaching and learning, and that is where I feel that it was not a good start to begin with. However, we are starting in with the national curriculum, with the single national curriculum and their expectations. The teachers are responding well, and the school groups and the school communities are also working hard to create more inclusivity and understanding. There are some structural flaws. For example, teaching Waqfat Amma in Urdu, and then moving and then doing the transition into English. So, in terms of metacognition, cognitive abilities, and in terms of bilinguality, this is a very flawed approach in the context of what do you call it, pedagogical construct. So so teaching one subject in the early years in your in Urdu, and then moving into English. So I do feel that cognitively and also in terms of pedagogical construct, that is a very wrong approach. It does not send a very good signal. There was there was this concept of policing the single national curriculum, and that has also subsided now. In the beginning, the district education officers and the executive education officers became very tough on schools in our communities, in the districts that we serve. So we also have seen that things have settled down. The Single National Curriculum Council is very supportive. Dr. Chughtai and a team, they are all the time into feedback and reflection and giving everyone an opportunity. So that is a very positive thing. So that is where I'll stop now.
Okay, thank you. So, Arshad Saab, I'll pose the same to you. That last time round you were a bit apprehensive whether publishers had the opportunity to actually prepare in time. Second was that the question of whether this was the floor of what was recommended or was it the maxima. So, I mean, in these 3 months, what have you seen?
So, thank you, Fasi. In terms of progress report, just for the benefit of everyone, the academic year this time around started in August. Now we are sitting in November, and even now there are publishers who are still waiting for NOCs. And just to give the context, education post the 18th Amendment is a devolved subject. So, whilst we have a single national curriculum that's been developed, yet its implementation lies with the provincial textbook boards or the provincial authorities. And each of these textbook boards has a different interpretation of the curriculum, and what is to be included and what is not to be included. That is where private publishers have struggled. And as a result, we have the situation is that today a number of private schools are still awaiting textbooks. So 4 months have passed, and textbooks are not available. And there is, although we've come a long way since the last time we spoke on this subject, yet I believe that there have been tremendous learnings that we've had from the implementation of the single national curriculum. And the first and foremost of this has been the understanding of the various terminologies. Faisal had referred to the single national curriculum being the minimum standards. And is it a set of SLOs that everyone must follow and that's it? Is it written in stone? Or is it a minimum standard that every school must ensure that every child in that year should at least follow? And then there are you can go over and above that depending on the pedagogical approach of a particular textbook series, depending upon how a school or a particular class is planning to take the course forward. The other important thing that I think has been lost in the implementation of this curriculum is the core philosophy of differentiation in teaching. And that I feel is completely lost in this whole process. Differentiation actually engages in a mixed ability classroom by bringing inclusivity through content, through language, and through progression, which is customized to the individual needs of the student and the class. So, I'd like to think that textbooks are a surrogate of the curriculum, where the curriculum is supposed to provide the intent. Textbooks are actually the vehicle of implementation and attainment. What's happening is that the textbook boards and the reviewers of the textbook boards are taking a very myopic view of the curriculum. They are not allowing you to go, even the name of the chapter, they require that you must follow the same name as has been used in the curriculum. The flow of chapters, or the sequence of chapters, they are not allowing you to change. And that, I think, is a very regressive approach to how we are looking at the curriculum. I think I'll end there, and back to you, Fasi.
Well, thank you for that. I think one of the things that I really enjoy about all of this is that I know all of you work closely and meet one another, and there's this really nice, light-footed dance around differences and engagement, and I really look forward to things like that. So now I will come to Dr. Mariam. So, Dr. Mariam, a lot of this is posed at you. First of all, congratulations. You're now the director of the National Curriculum Council. And so a lot of these questions come back that, these are valid critiques. These are issues that have propped up. So I'm just wondering, is that at the time, I mean, given that we've gone through, essentially a term, and these issues are propping up, and I think something that was alluded to earlier is that, with the 18th Amendment, in the time of framing the SNC, were these issues not considered, that this could come up, that this could be viewed this way, that actually there would be a difference in understanding of the philosophy?
Thank you very much once again for inviting me and for this very respectable panel. I know we don't always like each other, but it's good to be able to work with one another nonetheless. And I appreciate all the feedback. So I have taken over as the director of the National Curriculum Council. It's been a couple of months. Previously, I've been engaged and involved with the single national curriculum exercise as an outsider, expert on a particular subject. So I do have a perspective both from the outside and now from the inside. The challenges that have been put forth, I want to first of all reiterate that as Minister Shafqat Mahmood often does, that we are very open to listening and to finding ways that whatever feedback we're getting from the field on places where implementation can be more streamlined or needs to be drastically streamlined, we are working towards that. So there is no denial of any problem. And secondly, the question of, was this not thought through in the beginning? It has been thought through to a great extent, but what has happened is that when you're bringing a large-scale reform, for instance, previously in 2006, you had the curriculum made at the national level, and it would go as is to the public schools. So there was no need for giving flexibility or anything because it was going as is into the public schools. So these things were not really necessary. Now in this fold, beyond the public schools, on one end, you're bringing in the high quality private schools or all private schools. And on the other end, you're bringing in the Madrassahs. So the private schools and the Madrassahs actually have a lot in common from where I sit, because both of these entities have a value add on top of the curriculum, which they operate in the market and tell the parents that, if you send your kid to our school instead of a public school, you will get extra education, whether it's on religion or whether it's on dramatics or music or sciences. So they position themselves as a specialist of something. And I think what just the amount of work that is required to create core standards for a country where core standards have never existed is just so immense that there's a lot of underestimation of that task. The National Curriculum Council, in a very short period of time, managed to achieve core standards for primary grades, which more or less everybody has said are good core standards, good standards. All the critique that has come up based on mostly the textbooks, and not even the required textbooks, the model textbooks that are one of several options available in the market. But all people on this panel will agree, and I'm glad that we are at this point now, that we agree that having core standards is a good thing. And the fact that these core standards are benchmarked with international levels and acceptable to our private sector is a good thing. Now, if in that process, in this taking this big, large foundational step, the implementation of it is absolutely important and a priority for the government, but it will take time. You cannot, it's like drinking out of a fire hose. And what the government did in this, I do understand that the government going forward, because we are pleasantly, surprised and happy that so many people want to engage with this topic. So we are open to every feedback. But the thing is that in implementation, you have to really go step by step, and the government made sure, even though it perhaps could have done an even better job of communicating, when these standards were introduced and the textbooks this is not a medium of instruction policy, this was the policy of the textbook, the language of the textbooks, the language of half the textbooks was English and the other half was Urdu or regional language. The government never came out and said that if your child is not at fluency level in this new language by the end of this academic year, you have to fail that child. The government never said that the assessment now at every grade level or at any grade level is with the government. None of that was done. So the panic that was created. Now, I'm not denying the challenges that Arshad Sahab has just pointed out around the NOCs and the rigidity of the application of those standards. That critique is correct and well taken. But I'm saying that it's not that the government did not think through these challenges, and this is precisely why assessment has still remained and continues and will continue to remain at the school level, at the teachers level. So I think it is important to acknowledge the high quality work that has gone into standards, and the fact that we can all, irrespective of our affiliation, agree that they are good standards, and that within the implementation, whatever was within the government's control, immediately the government did take care of that.
All right, thank you for that. So I'm just going to come to Dr. Farid Panjwani. Thank you for being here. And I want to ask a relatively broad question. And so Dr. Mariam can correct me later if I'm wrong on this assertion, but when the whole SNC started, there was all this background noise and chatter that the real function of this is to create a unified nation. And at one level, we've seen historically, a lot of the chatter around education is also that it should be the tool of nation building as opposed to just education as well. So I'm just wondering, do you think that a national curriculum can actually foster unity, or is that its function? And what should we expect from this?
Thank you very much for this opportunity. Very glad to be here on this very important event, which I think has become a regular feature of our educational landscape and timetable. So now I think perhaps it is worthwhile to start by distinguishing between unity and uniformity. And I think many times people confuse these two ideas. So you can bring uniformity by asking, let's suppose even in any institution, asking people to wear same kinds of dress, same kind of uniform, or giving them same kind of furniture. So your office will have uniformity, but it may not have unity just because of these things. Unity is a different matter. it is a matter of kind of a spiritual and moral matter where one person feels connected with another, feels belonging to another. Now, the role of curriculum and the education system in bringing out this unity is there. I don't think we can deny that it can play a role. Because after all, as we know, a nation is an imagined community. And as an imagined community, the curriculum, the textbooks, the rituals of schools can create this symbolic link with this idea of nation. But that only goes so far, because the real things that create unity have to do with social justice. They have to do with people feeling that my place in this institution, this family, this community, this nation is important, that I'm heard, that law operates for everybody and not just for some, that if I make an effort, those efforts will be rewarded, that I'll be treated fairly, that if I'm a member of a minority religion or minority ethnicity, that is not going to be a hindrance for me to move forward in life. It's these kinds of social justice and constitutional and citizenship related issues that really forge unity in any nation. And you can see countries that we think are fairly united are because the citizens feel valued, they feel that regardless of their differences, they have a place on the table. So I think to expect from a curriculum or from even the whole of education system to create unity is too much. What it can do is shared vocabulary, it can create some shared sense of history, but eventually when people live their life and if they don't feel that this shared sense of vocabulary and shared history translates into equal opportunities, into socially just system, the unity doesn't work. So I think we should differentiate between unity, which is a very different matter and very hard thing to achieve, and uniformity in education system, which we can achieve by having similar kind of SLOs, similar exam systems, similar kinds of resources that are given.
Given what Dr. Panjwani just said, that in terms of you looking at, unity, whereas you're also looking at equality of opportunity, equality of access, equality of resources, if you're really looking to foster unity. I'm just wondering if private schools and relatively well-off private schools are having a considerable amount of difficulty with implementing the SNC. What do you think is that same problem taken down a couple of notches to more low-cost private schools and even madrassas? So for whoever would like to answer this.
So you see, what good is this enforced uniformity in absence of informed unity? This takes us to the debate of one size fits all. So this is also kind of like the Arshad Saab said, it's regression, but also it is also demonizing the social contract. Dr. Mariam talked about bridging the gap between private schools and madrasa. But who expects the states to cap standards and to cap teaching and learning, innovation and best practices? It shouldn't be a comparison between the madaris and between the private schools and then between the low-cost schools. When you talk about democracy in society today, the very fundamentals of democracy is equity, it is access, and it is choice. So when the very fundamentals of democracy is equity, access, and choice, then why do you want to come up with the national regime, which is talking about unifying the nation through a common set of standards, through a common set of textbooks? It's not possible. Schools are suffering all across the country. On the contrary, the low-cost private schools have benefited from the single national curriculum because they did not have a proper framework. There has been a study at the Harvard Business School that private schooling and education in Pakistan is not an urban elite phenomenon. It is a rural-urban phenomenon. There's a private school for rupees 1,000 in Bhalwal, and then there's a private school in Karachi, Clifton for rupees 50,000. So when you talk about the low-cost private schools and also in the context of public-private partnerships, in Pakistan, where Beacon House has a major contribution. In that context, those low-cost private schools have benefited from singularity approach in terms of providing them the textbooks, provided the publications are available in the market where there's a considerable delay. So in that context, they have benefited. But as a nation, when let's take an example of your airline. So you have a private airline and you have a national carrier. So just because you wanted to bring national carrier in the mainstream, you do not take out the landing rights from the international carrier. You do not take out the civil aviation licenses and permissions from the national carriers. You do not try to, what do you call it? Uh, you know, uh, Centralize the provision, the service, and the safety of the private carrier. So this entire comparison between good versus bad, and the front benches versus the back benches, at the very outset, and this is not a very, I would not say that this is a very progressive, or this is a very democratic, or this is a very inclusive approach. What good is education if it does not replace an empty mind with an open mind? A lot many people think that education is about acquisition of knowledge, skills, and values, but it is all about replacement of an empty mind with the one which is open. In these, this was not the right time if the state wanted to come with such a national curriculum, because of after the judicial activism in Pakistan, where the private schools were labeled, and then we had COVID. This wasn't the right time when 1.6 billion children were out of school in the world, and we had a lot of learning losses and learning poverty in the country. It was the biggest closure after the Second World War, and so the government should have considered empathy. This wasn't the right time. I think that it was a populist political agenda, and it has its own expectations. They have their own expectations. At the very outset, they start the debate by comparing madrasas with private schools. So what have we got to do with madrasa? What have madrasa got to do with us? And if the states wants to police all, then they should talk about the ideology and how, as a theocratic state, we are emerging. So they try to label everything between haves and have-nots. The job of the country is to put public sector education at the right place. 422 public sector schools of Fasi in Islamabad, 423. Why should not the National Curriculum Council pilot this initiative in 423 rural and urban schools? Why should they not? They know infrastructure improvement, world's largest out of school children population. Now, previously we were second largest, but after the pandemic, I think we are the largest out of school population in the world. No capacity building, no teacher training, no infrastructure. What is this? That we put together an office and we talk in terms of curriculum and standards. Why there is no action on the ground? So you have given the education has been demonized, has been privatized, and has not been rationalized in terms of the constitution, which makes it mandatory for the state to provide a free and compulsory education. And the 18th Amendment has created a lot of suspicion, and it has also put the ideology of the nation at risk. On one side, you have a constitutional amendment, which has created such big suspicion, and it now threatens the ideology. And on the other side, you have a federal body which now wants to create a minimum standards. Good enough, but a lot of provinces talk about multiculturalism, bilinguality, talk about their own mother tongues, and so on and so forth. And so, of course, research says that mother tongue teaching, it does help, but this entire process, it should have been minimum standards, it should have been national curriculum framework, and they should not have capped the textbook, and they should not have demonized Pakistani publishers and the Pakistani private sector provision providers.
Yes. So I'm going to just refer this first to Mr. Hussain. After that, if Dr. Panjwani, you want to make a comment. So, Mr. Hussain.
Thank you, Fasi. To answer your question, You were talking about its uniform implementation of the curriculum. So my take on that is that it has not been uniform in terms of its implementation. The general understanding is that madrasas have not adopted the single national curriculum, and there has been no enforcement of the curriculum in the Madaris system. The way the provincial governments have gone after private schools uh, and actually gone and conducted raids on private schools to see what textbooks they are teaching. I am not aware of any raids having been conducted on any madrasa to check whether they have adopted the single national curriculum or not. So, where is the uniformity in its implementation? So, the state schools have implemented the SNC. The private school system in Punjab, KPK, and ICT has been forced to implement the SNC. There has been very low, if at all, enforcement in the madrasa system. The original objective was to bring everyone to on one platform and have the same minimum standard. And I will again say minimum standard because that is what Mr. Shafkat Mahmood, our federal education minister, and the provincial governments have throughout been talking about, that this is the floor and it is not the ceiling. In its implementation, the provinces had made it the ceiling and have actually stopped schools from adopting textbooks that have anything outside of what the curriculum document says. So this has been an implementation disaster as far as the private school system is concerned. One more point to build on what Mr. Faisal Mushtaq was saying. In Pakistan, the only thing working well in our primary and secondary education was our private school system. The government education system is in shambles. And now, by the way the provinces have gone about in enforcing this curriculum, we've actually brought the private school system to their knees. So we've actually, whatever was working in our education system, we've also sort of created hurdles in its working and have brought it down to virtually a dysfunctional system. So we are no better off than we were. In fact, I would say that we are worse off now than we were a year ago, when you had the disparities in curriculum, when you had differences in the education system. At least somebody was getting an education. Now you have a system where nothing seems to be working at the moment.
Thank you for that, Mr. Hussain. Dr. Panjwani, you wanted to make a point?
Yeah. So I want to bring in a slightly historical dimension to it. See, countries like Pakistan face a challenge of forging national sentiments in the context of a huge ethnic, religious, and regional diversity of cultures that we have. And this is a challenge that Pakistan has right from the beginning. And historically, the response to this challenge has been by emphasizing the commonalities, by trying to create singular approaches in many different ways at the constitutional level and at the legislative levels. And that has not helped us. And I don't want to go into that history. I'm sure all of you are very well familiar with that. And I think subconsciously, the very idea of single national curriculum lends itself to that history, which has not helped us. And that perhaps is partly the reason for this suspicion that we have. I think there is no a priori reason, there's no conceptual philosophical reason why some sort of national curriculum cannot work. Many countries have it. But the question is this curriculum negotiating the desire for unity with the existence of diversity? And how is it doing it? And I think one of the ways, and I believe Mariam is working towards it, although without changing the name, to move it towards a core curriculum rather than a full-fledged curriculum that covers everything and doesn't leave space for provinces and for schools to do anything. I think if we can convert this into a core curriculum, perhaps even change the name and call it a core curriculum, with some basics that we believe every child in the country ought to have, regardless of different systems of education, and then let different regions and different schools develop their own depending on the context and their demographics. I think that could be a better way to negotiate what we want to achieve. So I think it's not that inherently the very idea of national curriculum is something that is not workable, but it will have to be made workable in the context of our context, where there is a need for certain level of umbrella, certain level of vocabulary and sense of citizenship that is across the board, but also respecting the other levels of identities that people bring to the table.
Thank you for that, Dr. Panjwani. So, Dr. Chughtai, I'll just come to you. There's a lot of things that people have been mentioning, but I'll just lead with one question, which is based on something that the three panelists have been also talking about, and Dr. Panjwani directly, which was that if you're looking at a curriculum that is helping to foster unity, so when we've seen some of the textbooks that have come out, there are gender parity issues, there are religious symbolism issues, and it's very clearly not of the form that is exclusionary. I mean, it may not be all of them, but there are definitely issues there. So just wondering whether how those are going to be addressed, and then obviously if you wanted to answer to some of the other points that were being raised.
Thank you, and a great question to add to the other questions that are built up. So first of all, I want to really appreciate what Dr. Panjwani said. I wrote it down as a quote. People tend to confuse unity and uniformity. You see, unity is different from uniformity in the sense that people think that if you bring a national curriculum, you're going to make everyone the same. Whereas diversity and uniformity are opposites. You know, if you make everybody the same, everybody wears the same uniform, you are the same. Diversity is children can wear whatever they want. But unity and diversity can coexist. In fact, unity, when you want to have diversity, is a very nice supplement to diversity. It is not at odds with diversity. So moving forward, what we want to do is to refine the language. So what we have been calling minimum standards, or we are going to call them core standards. So those are the things like literacy, numeracy, that we are all united on. How people achieve those standards, people will have all the diversity. What additional standards they want to bring in, people will have all the diversity at the school level. Within those standards, how much depth you want to go in at the grade level, you will have all the diversity. So my point earlier was not to say that, I think Mushtaq Saab, perhaps I did not communicate properly. I'm not saying that private schools and madrassas are the same thing. They're both not public schools. So I was saying they all both fall outside of the main public school system. And they both have a desire for that extra room for diversity. That even if we are coming in with, all right, we will start teaching science, math, and English, if Madrassahs, and they did agree when we first started out. But there was no restriction on them that they couldn't also create a Hafiz-e-Quran in their school, or teach their own curriculum on top of it. And that's sort of a similar concern that the private sector has. So it's very important to not be scared that it's going to be one size fits all, because I agree that is severely damaging to education. So therefore, going forward, we are going to be calling them core standards and core plus standards. And in core plus, the government, in coordination and consultation with provinces, will propose lots of core plus options. And it will not be restricted that these are the only Core Plus options that could ever be. So Core Plus could include coding curriculum for grades 1 to 5, or entrepreneurship curriculum, or tafsir curriculum, or whatever you want, or music, or arts, whatever you want. But Core Plus is where there will be all the diversity. And even within the core standards at the student learning outcome level, there can be diversity. So that I think is a very important distinction to make. And that gets linked up with the textbook issue you are just describing. There's a very nice article in Dawn today by Dr. A.H. Nair talking about how one textbook per subject has created a lot of problems, again, of uniformity. I think he ascribes that problem to the single national curriculum, but that problem has existed long before, even when I was in school. So we've had only one textbook per subject. So that, leaving that part aside, and that the exam system is based on textbook rather than on the standards, that problem is also very nicely identified in that article. So I think when you're going with this kind of a model, that we are all united on these basic core standards, you're not doing anything alien or out of this planet, or no one else has tried before. So that I think is very important. Second, the question of Madaris, that nobody from the Madaris has accepted, that's not true. If you look at our Ministry of Federal Education's website for the past year and a half, in fact, before any conversation about the single national curriculum came out in the public domain, 2 years ago almost, an MOU was signed with the 5 Wafaqul Madaris, and that MOU is still on the website, in which they had explicitly agreed to a number of things. In fact, several other additional things, such as registering their Madaris, such as making bank accounts. Now, you can imagine how difficult the transition for high-resourced schools has been to teach, say, Islamiyat or one additional subject in Urdu, while you already have an Urdu teacher in your schools. But in Madaris or in public schools, it's a very different state of things. It's not going to be that simple that the way we are managing compliance and implementation and support for the private school stream is going to be the same for the public school stream, is going to be the same for the Madaris. So to say that we are using this textbook, but Madaris are not using this textbook, therefore it has failed, I think it's simplistic. Bringing Madaris on board is a very complicated and very difficult exercise, has to be done very delicately, and progress has been made on it, more progress than has been done by several governments in the past. So, and evidence is that MOU on the website. Now there are an additional 10 Wafaq that I will now also be working with. And I will say that the new Director General of Religious Education, his PhD is on how Madaris have been used to radicalize society. And my PhD is on how public school system has been used to radicalize society. So I think we are a good team, and I think that the odds are in our favor. But I think to say that because the exact same enforcement mechanism is not publicly visible, therefore the government is not doing anything or not interested is not true. And finally, I will make one point about implementation, if I may just quickly. I think we underestimate the complexity of having a Article 25A in the Constitution, which says that the state must provide free and compulsory education to every kid between 5 and 15, and the 18th Amendment, which decentralizes education to provinces. So developing an interprovincial coordination system on some of these issues is going to take time. And implementation in 18th Amendment is a good thing. It allows for diversity, but bringing some balance towards, if we want to achieve some unity also, even if in some provinces, is not going to be that simple as wishing for it to happen, and it happens. But those things we are working on, and as we move forward, we want to bring in more clarity on how interprovincial and intra-provincial coordination can be streamlined.
Sure. We've had 2 audience questions, and one of which is that do you think that you've got such massive school systems across the country? Was it not the government's responsibility to train these teachers also into a new form of pedagogy, and whether that's been done effectively?
It is the government's responsibility, and it's a responsibility the government has taken seriously. Punjab government has trained more than 2 lakh teachers already and spent quite a few millions on that activity. In fact, now that I'm here and we're talking about, as we're making 6 to 12 and saying, okay, whatever we've learned from the field in K to 5, maybe we should, update the curriculum. There's a lot of anxiety because they're like, we've developed a lot of teacher expertise on this. Are you going to change the entire curriculum? And so there wouldn't be that anxiety if there was no additional work that had gone into the implementation side. The scale of work in Pakistan is very large, and for that, going forward, we are going to really engage technology. I'm in conversation with the National IT Board to maybe make a platform, which is like a national platform for every student, teacher, and administrator to have an account so they can use technology and develop customized content for teacher training, student resources, administration training, management trainings. And then eventually have some kind of an technology-based formative assessment mechanism, which is not high stakes. It doesn't make you pass or fail the course or the class or a teacher get hired or fired, but it does help as a mode of diagnosis as to what exactly are our kids learning. We don't have to wait for them to get to 5th grade to realize that they're learning and literacy numeracy is at the level of grade 2. So technology enables all of this, and a lot of this is already happening in other countries. And I think that we can expect more of this work to get better as we go along.
End of this, and I will give everyone a minute to give some final words. So, Dr. Chughtai, why don't we start with you? Your final words of wisdom for this.
I just spoke, so it's a bit unfair, but I will say that the title of today's talk is One Education System for All. I want us to think that when we're talking about the education system for all, we're using system as a common noun, not as a proper noun that educate the public school education system or the private school system. We're using it as a system of quality, one quality education system for all. So we are united on that, as Dr. Panjwani beautifully said, around social justice, around issues of access and quality and equity and diversity. I think the Common Core in the US, they use the term core. I think to say that it was a populist slogan in itself implies that there was popular support for this reform. So perhaps it was not the right time for the people who, despite a broken education system, they had found ways to make it work. But it was a popular slogan because there were a lot of people for whom the system was not working. So I think we want to go carefully, cautiously, and we look forward to working closely with high quality private schools and the high quality private publishers to help the government along.
Thank you for that. And Mr. Hussain, I'll come forward to you.
Yeah, I would say that it's taken us 74 years to do the transition from blackboards then to whiteboards. And now is the time that we do the transition from whiteboards to the digital boards. And education itself is going through digital inclusivity, is going through equity, is going through a process of inclusion, diversity. So anything that we may want to champion should be in the context of inclusivity. The cake was baked by someone else at the National Curriculum Council. So I'm optimistic that Dr. Chughtai shall take out the weeds out of the what do you call it, social experiment that the state has done with the imposition of single national curriculum, and she must rightly take it towards core standards or the core plus standards, but also focus on teacher training, capacity building, and look at multilinguality, cognitive abilities, and also the pedagogical truck with the core focus on the public sector standards and the responsibility of the state. And when you talk about unity, they should take their own provinces on board saying is totally not on board.
Thank you. Okay, and Mr. Hussain, we'll come to you very quickly. I apologize, we've really
Yeah.
run short right now.
Thank you, Fasi. I think what Dr. Chughtai has said is extremely welcome, because she's talking about taking the private sector on board with developing the curriculum, with identifying the challenges, and facilitating both the private sector as well as the public sector in its implementation. So I'd just like to highlight that the curriculum for secondary classes is in development stage, and we don't have too much time before the start of the next academic year, and sufficient time is required for the curriculum to be finalized, for the review and approval process of content of textbooks to take place, for us to be able to train teachers and be ready before the start of the next academic year in August. And it's very welcome that the government will be taking all stakeholders on board, including parents, teachers, students, and the publishers on board in designing the curriculum. Let's learn from our experience in primary, in the botched implementation of the primary curriculum that we've seen this year, and let's work towards improving it in the next academic year. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Mr. Hussain. And Dr. Panjwani, we'll ask you to give your final words and sum everything.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'll actually would like to use this opportunity to make a request and a proposal. I think it's wonderful that single national curriculum has generated tremendous debate about education. That has never happened. That itself is a very good thing. However, I think there is another debate that should have happened before, but can happen now as well, is about the very purpose and meaning of education. We do have slogans about what the purpose of education is, and every time I've attended some conference about this, basically I hear making good Pakistanis and good Muslims, but that's not enough. And there's a whole field called philosophy of education that links education to society. We don't have it. It's basically dead here. I think it's a very important discourse that we need to have. So what ultimately is the purpose and meaning of education that we have? And then I think everything else should flow from it. And I hope that this forum and others would lead to create a discourse around this question of what is the philosophy of education with which we are working.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. So thank you, Dr. Mushtaq. Thank you, Mr. Hussain. Thank you, Dr. Chughtai and Dr. Panjwani. It was an honor to hear all of you speak. So thank you all. Really appreciate it, and hope to see you soon.
Thank you very much.